McGreger spent over a decade running Farmer's Daughter Pickle and Preserves, where she earned 13 Good Food Awards. Her work and recipes have been featured in Bon Appetit, The New York Times, Southern Living, and many other publications. And she is the author of Sweet Potatoes in the beloved Savor the South cookbook series. These days, she writes the Substack Preserving the South, is a certified Penn State master food preserver, and runs a fermentation program at a mutual aid kitchen in Philadelphia. Welcome to the Wild Kitchen, April.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk to you today.
I have been following you since I read a recipe that you had in Garden and Gun magazine. I think it was back in like 2020 or 2021 or something. I was like, oh my God, this like the recipe and I keep coming back to this. I'm finding in this podcast, I keep coming back to it reminded me of my grandma. It reminded me of something
What
that
recipe was it? Yeah,
it
that's it.
was it was a cucumber salad, and I don't know what it was about it. It's
Was it a
like,
corn salad?
yeah, it had corn and cucumber and
Yes.
tomatoes in it. I was like, "Oh, that's like it's the food I ate in Nova Scotia in my summers when I go back and visit my family." And, you talk a lot about, sitting at the elbow of your mother and grandmother, cooking food in the town you grew up in, and, it just, like, it really resonated with me. I'm like, it just there's this familiarity of the food you're cooking, and, um I found it super interesting. So I'm curious, when you were a little girl, growing up in Vardaman, is that how you say it?
Mhm.
Yeah. What kind of stuff were you doing? Like, what kind of stuff in the kitchen were you doing? How are they including you in the food?
So yeah, when I was a little kid, and
Mhm.
my absolute favorite thing to do before I even, before I started actually cooking in the kitchen, we were pretending to cook. So I, grew up making mud pies and playing in the sandbox for, 8 hours a day, literally.
Yeah.
Just my sister and I are a year apart, and we spent most of our really young life just digging in the mud. And we lived on this big hill, and what other people call a farm, but when we were growing up, we didn't really use the word farm.
Yeah.
Weirdly, it was, although we had horses and gardens and fruit trees and dogs and chickens, sometimes it just depended. We still somehow thought farming was, a more organized, intentional, like, row cropping is
Yeah.
kind of what we thought was farming then. But yeah, so, but from an early age, like, no one was really, I always say, no one taught me how to cook, you just learn by doing. And
Mm.
my mom, by the time I was, like, 11 or 12 years old, my mom definitely was, had me, and my sister, but me mostly because I was the most driven to cook. I was making, weeknight dinners using my mom's little index card and like recipe boxes from,
Yeah.
you know, I always say like Betty Crocker style recipes, definitely working mother, but we had a lot of meals that were the old style of, lots of little pots. So you have your potatoes and your peas or butter beans, which are very, very standard fare in Mississippi. And then, cornbread or rolls, and then either baked chicken or pork chops, or sometimes a fried pork chop. So a lot of those kind of meals too. But she definitely, was not afraid of chicken and rice casserole using like, a packet of Lipton
Yep.
onion soup mix, and minute rice or something, I
Yeah.
guess. Those types of recipes that's definitely how I learned to cook.
A lot of the recipes and looking at the products you're making with, Farmer's Daughter, it was like chow chow, mustard pickles, and even just now talking about the food you're cooking, it w it's so close to the food in Nova Scotia, it's crazy, and so I was like, Why is this food so close?" 'Cause these are pretty, like, they're especially at the time when these foods were being developed and cooked, and, they still, are around today, obviously, but, like, how did such a wide geographic area develop very similar foodways? So I was looking at it, and I had no idea. There's, like, the Black Loyalists that got sent up north in the mid
Mhm,
1700s, and then the Acadians got sent south, and,
mhm.
I'm curious if there was I mean, there must have been some sort of sharing of food because it is so similar.
I mean, yeah, I would guess, for I mean, for my foodways, for
Mm,
sure, There had the when I say, like, cooking in a lot of little pots, that
Yeah,
style of cooking is, like, very, very British, very Irish, whatever, very,
yeah,
Scottish. My family is definitely, comes from, um, they're Highland Scots
yeah.
and Irish and, Scots, Irish, and all in between, but mostly Scottish and Irish, and I mean, the food, I literally just came back from Ireland and, over and over again, the food feels very similar and
Oh, good.
hasn't changed in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
The thing that changes, I think, was, they say that nothing defines what you eat more than just like, your latitude, your climate, like what grows. So
Yeah.
and definitely in Mississippi, you're gonna have a lot more okra, a lot more of those kind of, like, peas and butter beans, those really
Mm,
warm weather, crops, and we certainly lean very heavily on those, or, like, the substituting corn for
mm,
whether it's, like, oats or, barley or wheat or corn just grows so well in the warm weather climate of the South that that ended up being, the backbone of the cuisine. So I feel like we probably it's just, those kind of like Northern European roots and that sort of thing. So
mm.
there's that certainly. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of
Yeah.
we probably share that basis a little bit.
Now that you say that, I think that that definitely explains it. I've got Macintosh on one side, Northern Highlands, and Sinclair on the other side, I think. Yeah, no, that definitely ticks that box. And you grew up in a place that sort of self-designated as the sweet potato capital.
Yes.
Yeah, how is it growing up in a place that's, like, so tied to one crop?
Um Yeah, I mean, that was I feel like what's interesting about
Mm,
that to me, my brother actually my dad farmed sweet potatoes and my brother now farms sweet potatoes, and I helped my brother, build out his website, and we
mm,
were trying to think of what, how to tell the story his story of farming because while my brother, my dad was the first person in my family to commercially grow sweet potatoes. Everybody, like, every single generation, like, every census that we ever filled out listed
mm,
farmer as the occupation, that's, like, what we've done from, since coming to this country and before in Scotland, Ireland, England, was farm. And I always say that that migration pattern we avoided. We did everything we could to avoid industrialization. When England and Great Britain started industrializing, it's like we got to get out of here. And then and then in the U.S., it's like come into Pennsylvania, come into North Carolina, just keep moving down, keep moving further and further over out into the outskirts trying to whenever, industry and things like that came in. So, um, there's definitely a lot of that, farming and, uh, all the way back, but
mm,
sweet potatoes became a market crop in the town where I am, and it originally started s because, there was these families in Tennessee who were farming sweet potatoes and
mm,
realizing that it was a commercially viable crop, and they were looking for land, that was a certain type of soil that worked well with sweet potatoes. Honestly, I was just talking to my brother about this. Sweet potatoes are very, very, I wouldn't say they're easy to grow, but
mm,
they are resilient. They're a
yeah,
resilient crop. You do not have to have that perfect, Mississippi Delta soil or that
mhm,
perfect black belt soil. They do not require the types of soil that like cotton
mm,
required. And generally the middle of Mississippi is sort of the red dirt of the state and considered, and you generally find poor people. There were not you did not have this plantation economy that you had on both the eastern and the western side of Mississippi.
yeah,
But that red dirt actually worked really well with sweet potatoes. So these farming families from Tennessee, I think it was originally four families, came down into Vardaman, and there was land available there for them to farm on, and so they started farming, and a lot of and other farmers who were already other families who were already in the area started farming after that, and it just became an area that was, yeah, very, very tied to sweet potatoes my whole life. That, Really nothing would have ever happened in our hometown if we hadn't had, all these festivities around sweet potatoes, so that
Yeah,
kind of made it exciting. The sweet potato, festival was like the first Saturday in November, and it was, like, the most exciting thing that happened in our town, and
yeah,
we would have, sweet potato queen, so all the a lot of my friends were competing for the sweet potato queen, and we would have a and you'd get to ride in, a convertible in the, in the,
yeah,
Christmas parade every year, those types of things, so, I mean, I don't know, it was kinda fun. I
yeah,
also my mom's best friend, Miss Cardwell, was, like, the home ec teacher in our high school, and we, the home ec class always helped run the sweet potato, like, tasting booth at the
nice.
festival every year, so I was involved in that, and,
Mm,
it was fun. I always say it kind of inspired, like, creativity, I feel like,
mm,
as a cook, 'cause I would have, cooking contests and, like I said, this tasting booths, and so it was always, "What else can we make out of sweet potatoes?" And so I mean, I've had sweet potato sherbet. We eat a lot of raw sweet potatoes, like,
really?
instead of carrot sticks, you can unlike, russet potatoes or
Yeah,
Irish potatoes, as people say, that are poisonous raw, sweet potatoes are totally fine to eat raw, so and you can eat them like carrots or whatever, so anything almost anything, because sweet
yeah,
potatoes are a bit of a act sort of like a starch in recipes. They're very easy to especially in baking, are very easy, and they add a really nice, beautiful orange color if you use the orange
mhm,
varieties, so lots of creativity, I feel like, is, um it's spurred on by that. And it's nice just having so many different families and people who are sort of employed in the same industry.
yeah,
Um, there is a little bit of competition that I feel like has happened
yeah,
in recent years as farming and capitalism have proven why they don't work very well
mm,
together. But growing up, it felt like everybody was sort of working. A lot of families were kind of working on the same project, if not as farmers, as my I had a close friend whose dad was like a mechanic who like
mm.
fixed all the tractors. So, everybody's kind of participating in the one big agricultural economy. So that's nice.
It's cool too that it's like, I find these communities that have something like, you driving on the highway, you see a sign for a town, it says, like, "Welcome to blah, 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 home of whatever," and different areas have different signs, and I find certain regions are, like, very humble. It'll be like, a nice place to stay or something like that, but it's cool to go to a place that's, like, proud of their heritage, proud of what it is. I was in a town last week, and it was gateway to Wells Gray Park. So, gateway to a completely different place, like, their pride and joy of their town is that you have to drive through it to get somewhere else, which I thought was a really strange thing. It was a little sad, like, I like the fact that there's something that brings everybody together and ties a town together. It's neat.
Yeah, it always made me happy that
Mm,
most farming towns in America today, because they are so mechanized and because so much of the corn that's grown is not food that you can eat.
mm,
To have a farming town with food that you can eat,
yeah,
and lends itself to creativity, I feel like is a much better, and probably much better than most of the other sort of agricultural communities and towns in the U.S. Especially like in the Midwest, where it feels like what it has meant to be a farming town is that you actually move all the people out
yeah,
of the town, because people are not required for most agriculture anymore. But sweet potatoes are really fun and unique that way, where they have resisted mechanization, and they still require a lot of human
mm,
hands laid on them to they can't be machine dug and machine sorted completely the way that a russet potato is, because their skins are too thin.
mm,
um yeah, so you still need people to grow sweet potatoes.
that's cool. And so this sort of naturally lends into the conversation about your book, and I've read that you were the I can't remember the exact wording, but basically there was no other person that could have written this book aside from you for sweet potatoes, and that you had bristled a little bit at the cap of 50 recipes for the cookbook. Um, what was it like? How did that conversation come up where you were approached to write this book for this?
Yeah, that conversation happened at a Southern Foodways Alliance
Oh,
event
cool.
in Oxford, Mississippi, where I was. the pastry chef for, one of the dinners that we
Mm.
had, and the dessert that I made was a sweet potato crème caramel,
Oh,
and, the editor at that time at UNC Press was Elaine Maisner, and she, um, requested that I write the book on sweet potato and she heard my story, I guess, when
yeah.
we were talking about when I introduced when they introduced the chefs for the dinner. I told
Mm.
the story about how my family grew sweet potatoes and we used their sweet potatoes for the dinner, just down the road from where we were having that dinner. And, anyway, so she asked me to write the sweet potatoes based on that one dish
Really?
alone. She
She
was
must
like,
have loved
"As
it.
long as this recipe's in it, I don't care. Put it," like, it was like, "We just definitely need these sweet potato creme
Ah,
caramels." She was a big fan,
really?
so, that was really sweet. And I lived in Chapel Hill, at the time, had gone to grad school at UNC, so, that wasn't why she asked me to write the book, but it did make it convenient in terms of, working on that project. Yeah, and when I said 50 recipes, I thought, well, I could easily write 50 recipes just on, like baking
Yeah.
recipes for the sweet potato, but all the other books had, every category of food. So
Mm.
I thought, well, I'm gonna have to do some serious editing in order to get get my baking repertoire of sweet potatoes down to
Oh,
not take up the entire book, so I had to
did
make some hard choices, I guess.
did it change how you saw yourself in your career? Like, you've for people that don't know you, you've jumped around, like, you studied geology, you went to Italy to study volcanoes, came back and were like, "Yeah, no, I think I wanna get into food," and you've like, so you were a pastry chef and now you're a cookbook writer, like, did it change your perception of yourself or how you saw yourself? Did you consider yourself a writer at that time?
So I have, I'm continuing to evolve in how I see myself. I
Yeah.
thought of myself as a very steady, grounded person, but for a steady grounded person, I have definitely jumped around. I guess I would credit being, from the really small town that I'm from in a really small high school with my, sort of extreme well-roundedness that has
Mm,
made, the modern world of, specialization has never really been my lane. Although I don't think of anything that I've done as being new. None of it came out of nowhere. I feel like I've done all those things since the beginning. As an undergrad, I was an English major.
mm,
So I was writing, did a lot of
okay.
creative writing as an undergrad,
Mm,
in college at Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi. You know, I wrote in high school. I've always been a big fan of, of writing and cooking, and like I said, mud pies, and dirt, very interested in and now, in terms of, like, food and culture and, like, I'm so drawn to history, and this
mm,
sort of like geology is all about this like deep history and,
yeah,
just the enormity of time and, and how many, and what we came from and what we came, and where we're going and what we're all part of, all of those like really big ideas of have always been, part of what that wonder, geology
mm,
is really really about, this wonder and like, trying to solve these mysteries of, where we came from and how we got here and, and just the mysteries that are all around us and, under our feet. And I feel like I bring that same kind of idea to no matter what I'm studying.
mm,
But when I came out of geology graduate school, I decided to, I had gone to actually, I got my master's thesis on this volcano in Italy, Stromboli volcano.
mm,
And up until that time, like when I went to graduate school, I had worked in restaurants. I started working in my best friend, one of my best friends in high school. Her parents owned a little, cafe gas station combo that I
mm,
worked in. I was like frying chicken and making biscuits at 4 a.m. as a high school student.
mm,
So, I've been cooking and living that life For a very long time, and in a
Mhm.
small town like Vardaman, we didn't have restaurants, and my family, we cooked for fun. We cooked to bring everybody together.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, and, it was both creative and very sensory rich, and those things are what always drove me to cook and call how cooking really spoke to me. And then, in college, I worked in restaurants, and particularly these small independent restaurants, which became, a big inspiration. Hal and Mal's in Jackson, Mississippi inspired a lot of the work that I do. Um, but studying English and geology, I didn't decide that I was going to do geology and go to geology grad school until I was a senior. I kind of made that switch at the very last minute. And when I was in grad school, I ended up studying, of all things, also by accident, volcanology. Ended up studying this, doing a master's thesis on the statistics, using statistics to discriminate between which vent of a multi-vent volcano the explosion came from, like how, like using data. Anyway, statistics and
Yeah.
volcanoes. And, but when I came back, my boyfriend, who's now my husband, was like, "You seem," I was like talking all about the food,
Yeah.
recreating all the different foods, cooking everything that I had eaten,
Yeah.
trying to, talking about this restaurant that I went to that had 5 desserts, and every single one of them was lemon, and you could see the lemons growing on the, hillside on the side of the volcano, like off the porch of the restaurant, like while you were eating it. I had never really encountered any of those things. I was literally, 22 years old, maybe.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, my now husband said, "You seem a lot more. You seem really passionate about the food, like
Yeah.
more passionate about the food than the geology. Are you sure you shouldn't be doing something in food?" And I'm like, "Oh well, I mean, I know I'm obsessed with food. Like food is my thing, but I'm not sure that I want to have that be my job because I don't want to, burn out on it. I don't want to
Yeah.
grow to hate something that I love so much." And he was like, "Well, the world needs more people who are passionate about the work that they do."
Yeah.
So he's the one who, really kind of pushed me into trying out working in food. My last semester of grad school, my funding ran out, and I decided, because I had switched my project at the I had switched my project, and so I had run out of funding when I was finishing up writing my thesis, and decided to get a job in the best restaurant that I knew of in town, and, I never left. So, I eventually left that restaurant, but I never left working in food, and I worked from that night for the next 7 years at the same at the same restaurant in Chapel Hill. That was Lantern Restaurant, um,
And
on
you
Frank.
worked in pastry.
I started out just working on the savory side of things, and
Yeah.
I did
Yeah.
that for about 3 years, and they had a lot of trouble, filling the pastry chef position. It had, several different people had gone through there, and Andrea, who was the chef, was just like, can you just do the pastry?" Because I had worked on, like, when you start, you work, generally in restaurants, like garde manger,
Yeah.
so doing salads and desserts and that type of stuff. And, and I'd had to fill in or something before. Anyway, she asked me if I would do it, and, I was really tired of working at nights,
Yeah.
and this was gonna give me some more flexibility, so I was like, "Sure, I'll try it." But, I mean, what was amazing about working pastry, and the reason that I stayed in it, was that, well, first of all, I've always really loved, fruit. But
Mm.
the other thing is that, Andrea, who is the executive chef, she was, she did the menu completely on the savory side of things, but she didn't really know anything about pastry.
Mm.
And so I had creative leeway in pastry, which is what I've always loved about cooking.
Yeah.
So I got to, plan the menus, decide what we were going to cook, and then even, like, decide who I was gonna buy everything from and sourcing things. So then farmers markets became, well, I was already shopping at them, but it became a much bigger part of my, identity as a chef is, like, choosing, the different local ingredients for the menu, and I became really, close with a lot of farmers. And then when I left Lantern and started doing, Farmer's Daughter, which was making preserves and pickles and fermented foods, and then started selling at the same farmer's market that I
Yeah.
had been, you know, shopping at. as a pastry chef. So, it really was just everything in Chapel Hill was really, in Carborough, where those 2 towns are sort of interconnected.
Mm,
It was really, I mean, it was just all very community based in this, like, local economy, um, and these diversified farmers, these very small scale, like, what they call closed loop farmers,
yeah.
um, sustainable farmers or whatever, are really doing, I mean, I feel like the Farmer's Daughter, my preserving company that I opened up, modeled itself on these diversified farmers, much so that it did on, it resembled their work a lot more than it resembled, these giant, like, pickle companies
Yeah.
or, industrial, it certainly wasn't anything remotely similar to what they're doing at, like, Smucker's or, Mount Olive Pickle Company or anything like that. It was really about, taking what's growing in the fields, processing it, putting it in a jar, and usually processing it in a very, like, old world, traditional method, where you're doing things because they're, like, very slowly, literally,
Yeah.
and, because they, give you the most interesting textures and the best flavors, and not because, they're a fast way to turn, colored fruit water into jelly or whatever, you know?
Well, I think the commercial jam industry has shown us that it doesn't produce tasty food and healthy
Yeah.
food. It produces food that makes some money, and I saw that I read somewhere that you don't use well, you didn't use commercial pectin, like, you cook down the fruit with sugar, you use, like, twice as much fruit as other places did, and I'm curious if it was the practical experience with your family learning how to make these things that gave you the confidence to do that, or were you relying more on, like, your scientific background to, like, understand how things work from that side to trust yourself to know how to do that?
Well, when I, first started, okay, so what made me wanna make preserves? The first thing that made me want to make preserves
Mm,
was that we had the most amazing farmers market, and the produce and, at the Carborough Farmers Market, the produce was just world class,
mm,
beautiful. Farmers seemed to be obviously so skilled. The had a diverse population of people buying stuff, and the produce was just top notch. At the same time, there was no one there who was making preserves anything remotely similar to the really delicious, like whole fig preserves,
mm,
pear preserves, muscadine jellies, and things that I had grown up with. Like,
mm,
it was nothing comparable. So I knew that there was, well, I thought maybe there was
yeah,
space for a high quality, product that
yeah,
could match the high quality of the vegetables and so that is sort of my first thing, and then second is, like, because I was buying my, fruits and things from these farmers, it would always be they were always trying to push more strawberries off on me at
yeah.
the height of the season, like, "You sure you can't use another couple of flats? I got a truck full," and I would say, "You gotta make jam. You gotta make strawberry, preserves or whatever for these." And they would say, like, "I don't have time," and I don't know how to do that, like, so,
Yeah.
um, it ended up where I just felt this need, to make more, and, and actually another job that I had was, working at a blueberry farm when I
Mm,
was still in grad school before I started working, at, Lantern. I was picking blueberries.
oh,
And so that, I started thought I would make blueberry jam from the blueberries that I was picking, and it turned out terrible, and I thought I'm very competitive with my mother. I blame her for that, not me.
yeah, of
But,
course.
she that's a whole other
Yeah.
story. But she would never let me make sweet stuff at home because she always was gonna do that. She didn't want us to, quote, "mess up," the cakes or the pies or the preserves or whatever that she was making. She would I would help her a little bit, but she was always in charge completely on the preserves front. Um, and, and I thought, well, if my mom knows how to do this, I'm gonna learn how to do this, and so I kept trying with the blueberry jam, and then I, made some strawberry, and, I was getting better. So I'm not the person who's gonna fail at something and just let that go. That's not
Yeah.
gonna stay. I'm gonna win, I'm gonna come back and turn this thing around,
Yeah.
and so I kept that sort of motivated me, I feel like, to work on it. But in the beginning, it was completely intuitive. I mean, I was absolutely reading books and reading what other people said and trying to figure out what, um, and a lot of the recipes where, you add the pack of pectin, and my mom, we didn't use pectin. Like in
No.
there were a few things that she made with pectin, but like the what I wanted was like the style of like fig, pear were the 2 most common by far of the
Mm.
ones that she made, and then they would make plum and strawberry. Those were really the 4, and then my aunt would make blueberry jelly and then muscadine jelly, but my mom made preserves only, and none of those had any pectin in them, and they just have a silkier mouthfeel. They're very fruit forward. It's not like that they're low sugar, but they just are they're not water. The water is cooked out, and they're cooked in a manner. They're bright with like fresh lemon. And they're just real chunks of fruit, really
Yeah.
recognizable as fruit. And so when I started, doing that, I was reading everything that everyone else had said. I had seen my mother make them 100 times, and my grandmother. Although, preserving, usually when I would go to my grandmother's house, who lived an hour and a half away from us, she was making dinner. So there wasn't a lot of preserve making. I would see her doing prep and things like that, but not the actual making of the preserves. But my mom, I was always around. My mom would always be, you know, uh, on a Saturday, cleaning house, and at the same time trying to very slowly cook down a pot of pear preserves or fig preserves, and you have to really watch them close. And she would be wanting to run back and vacuum in the back of the house, so she would have me bring her a plate with a spoon of the
Yeah.
put a little of the fig on there and bring it to me and let me see what it looks like. And then she would tell me whether to turn it off or not turn it off. So I
Nice.
still use that exact same test, to
Yep.
this day, all these years later. But I started out, that way, intuitive. Only later, when I was reading and when I was trying to get a more standardized process and teach other people and figure out how to teach preserving, did I really try to figure out what people were talking about with like refractometers and um, you know um, bricks and all this kind of
Yeah.
like more scientific stuff.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was curious about for someone that cooks intuitively. How do you teach that, right? Like, I think you probably have to teach them the science-based stuff so they can build their own trust in themselves and when they cook. I know when I bake bread, I I don't like using recipes. I maybe sort of as a background, and I've got a friend who's like, "How do you cook or how do you bake bread without a recipe?" I'm like, "Well, because I've done it for so many years. I used to work at a bakery. I know like I know when I touch the dough and it feels a certain way or if it's humid or if I'm using a different a wheat grain or
Mhm.
whatever it is, the temperature, it all totally changes things, and using a recipe is so limiting. It you can't change how you behave or how you change the recipe or how you bake it if you're like everything's standard because it's not standard. Never is.
Yeah, I feel like just hearing you talk about that about bread, we could probably talk for a very long time about how as in the modern world,
Mm,
most people are completely divorced from their senses. The idea
totally.
that you would use your senses
Yeah.
to know what to do or when something is ready or how to season something or but especially like how do you know how do you make a same I don't like recipes for that way reason either because the flow state the just like how your entire body, it is alive with, sensory, like taking in all different kinds of information. When you're cooking by feel, there's just nothing compared to it. Whereas when I was trying to follow a recipe for making, pepper jelly on the back of the pectin box, and it just tells you to boil it for 1 minute and then just put it into a jar, and then maybe you have to wait 48 hours to know whether or not it worked. And
Yep.
I'm thinking, this is terrible.
Oh, yeah.
I need to know. Like, I don't
Yep.
want to put it in the jar if I don't know that
No.
it worked. Like, there has to be a better way. And why are we doing it? And what's happening? So I'm a very curious person where even though I'm an intuitive cook, I'm always saying, how does this work?
Mm.
Why does this work? Why does this not work? Well, how do we get it to where it does work? I love problem solving, and but I really love using every sense that I have to make something, perfect the right way. Um, uh, exactly how I want it or whatever. Or just paying attention to how this time is different from last time because for me, like perfection doesn't equal standardization. I don't have like one. It's not like McDonald's where their burger or whatever has to be the same every time or it's a failure, right? Well, when you're working with, strawberries that maybe had a little bit more rain this time, maybe aren't as sweet this season, maybe, you're always having to adjust to that difference. And how do you teach that? I mean, I think the first thing you have to do though is you have to get people to um, we can say trust their senses, but I think you have to go further back than that because why would they trust their senses if their senses are not developed? So you have to have sensory education. You have to have taste education. You have to, start over. It really, really helps if people can understand what things are supposed to taste like when they're young, right? Because your brain is being imprinted with like what should food taste like. And if what food should taste like to you is processed food, then that is what, you're never, that's what you're gonna think things should taste like. For me, luckily, I think things should taste like, the food that came out of the little pots that my grandmother was cooking in. And that, like, I'm going for those similar flavor profiles no matter what I'm cooking. I may change the format and make something like a more modern version of some of those dishes, but still in my mind, it's got a little smokiness. It's got this balance of the, that little vinegar twang and a little sweetness, from whether it's from like, cured pork or just like a little sprinkle of sugar or, sorghum molasses or whatever it is, that kind of balance. You get that flavor memory from tasting things. And having this kind of this standard that you're comparing things to all the time. But people don't trust their senses because they've never had to use them. I mean, that's knowledge, right? That's been
Yeah.
stolen from us by this modern industrial system for whether it's cooking in this instance, but you could think of a million other examples why that's knowledge that we lost. But we're put in these impossible situations where how do you work all these hours and still cook dinner for your family every night, right? So you're in a desperate situation where you need somebody to come in and do some of the work, but there is there's a lot of know-how buried in that drudgery, that we
Yeah.
have to figure out how do you pull out the good parts and save those without um and improve the situations that do need improvement.
Yeah, and I think, it like, you touched on so many good things, but there's, like, people looking at food as an end goal. They have to get on the table. It's just like the
Yes.
Jetsons, a sort of little pill they take, they get their nutrition, whatever it is. I mean, if nutrition even plays into it for a lot of people, it is really like, they can't they just need to get food in their system.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people don't like food either, which makes it hard for them to trust what's good and what's bad if they're just like, "Ugh, it's just whatever. I just want something salty and greasy or whatever,"
Right.
right?
Or they're
Um,
afraid of things being
yeah,
delicious. Like, I know that happens in my husband's family where,
yeah,
uh, food being really good, that's very dangerous, you know?
yeah, exactly. It's unhealthy or indulgent or sinful or something I grew up in a house that used butter, and ate
Mhm,
red meat, and we had a garden, and so food was like it was how you showed love, and it was a pleasure, and for me now, like, I I went to school, I studied sociology, I became a chef because I realized that I needed to cook. It was how I it's when I'm stressed, I get in the kitchen.
mhm,
It's how I show my family I love them, and I got that through my family and growing up in that experience. I saw my grandmother do it. She'd get up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning and bake bread every day and make
mhm,
pies. Like she'd make me her own special little raspberry pie for me for my breakfast, and I, I that stayed with me. And I don't think people have that experience. It's and y you can teach them how things should taste, but I think that that love of food and that
mhm,
fear of indulging yourself holds them back from really
mhm.
trusting their gut and their intuition for something to be able to give that back too.
Right.
Yeah.
It also I feel like is about like you talking about like eating in your grandmother's kitchen or whatever. I think most people don't have that, and it's not just
Mm,
like the grandmother's kitchen. It's like this warm
mm,
place that people want to stay. Like,
yeah,
right? That's um now I feel like one of the things that we struggle with in my husband's family is like we often want to cook even like I just cooked for 17 of us who got together for my mother-in-law's 80th birthday, and, and everyone's like, "Oh, I don't want you to be in the kitchen all day." Like, that's it's such a
oh.
struggle. And like it's true. Like the thing is like I don't want to be in the kitchen all day by myself, but
Yeah.
that's not how it was when I was growing up and cooking with
Yeah.
my family. It's like I'm not asking everyone you know, to be all hands on deck and we're all participating in cooking a meal like that also sounds like a nightmare, but like if a few people at a time want to come through and like just help out for a little while,
Right.
contribute something that they might enjoy doing, sit at the bar, make me a cocktail and talk to
Mhm.
me, let me find out what you've been working on, or while I'm like the kitchen as like a warm social
Yeah.
place that is just like full of energy and life and
Yeah.
participation as both a way to interact and a way to enjoy yourself and like to to gain skills and um dignity and to feel just worthy, to
Yeah.
feel like a contributor. And like that style, that sort of like that my family, like growing up, like we were such a team. Everybody
Yeah.
knew what each person in the family, could contribute and how they were necessary and how they would be missed, not just their personalities, which that would also be missed. And that's true. I don't that is true for a lot of families who don't see the value of being in the kitchen together. But for us, we were, I think that comes from coming out of this like subsistence farming background of like your contribution is vital to the
Mhm.
success of the family. And and I got a lot of self-worth out of that when I was sorry, I
It's all good.
silenced it, but it's not
It's all
it's not
good.
listening. I got a lot of self-worth out of that when I was a kid growing up wanting to uh you know just feeling like my dad saying, you know can you do anything with these all these extra cucumbers? Can you do anything with, do you want all these tomatoes that we can't eat these fast enough, we need to do
Yeah.
something with them. And figuring out how to do that, or people would get very excited,
Yeah.
it's like and I felt like, I was doing this thing that really needed to be done. Anyway, yeah, so I still feel that way about the kitchen. You really, but more than anything, you have to somebody has to create that glue, that feeling,
Mhm.
and it is usually the mothers and the grandmothers who, if anyone is going to do it, um it's going to be them.
Thinking about it, I've had a few conversations with different people. I was speaking with Dorina Allen, actually, the first episode of this podcast, I spoke to her. We spoke quite a bit about feminism and these roles in the home being devalued. and
Mhm.
how there seems to be a resurgence finally, like, which is like, I remember telling people I wanted to cook, and they're like, Why would you cook? Like, what is your problem? Like, that's like, you went to school, like, why wouldn't you go do that? Go work in an office, you've worked so hard, why?" It was that you'd work so hard, why would you do that? And it's like you said, like, just describing this social center of the family, and I don't know. I'm definitely biased, but I feel like it's in the kitchen and giving everyone in the family, they all have roles and they're all valuable. It doesn't have to be the wife in the kitchen cooking, but like that work is valuable. Like, holding that family together through dinners and providing food is a valuable role. And it's been so devalued for so long that it's nice to see it coming back a bit and people like proudly not in a I have a $40,000 stove behind me and I'm making whatever. Not to begrudge anyone in their lifestyle choices or anything, but like not that Instagram like kind of obnoxious housewife homesteader role, but like in a real way, like people can do this and
Mhm.
showing the value of it. It's great to see.
Yeah, I mean, I've written about, I've thought a lot about all of those things, and exactly. I think if that's not if a woman does not want that, and honestly, in a lot of the um, in a lot of the couples that I know of, a lot of the times there are men who are taking a stronger role um, in the kitchen, in family dinners and things like that. And I, as they say, mothering is a verb. There's no reason
Mm,
why it only needs to be women who are doing that level of caretaking. But it's not just feeding the family, it is also meaning making. I mean, I feel like that is probably, it is passing, it's your women are cultural bearers in that way. They're passing along, they are telling stories of the food that they're cooking. They're creating identity in families, letting people know who they are, where they came from, where they're going, what their values are. All of that happens through food, and there's food is absolutely the best way to do all of those things because it happens at least a couple times a day.
mm,
You have to eat, right? And then it's also can be joyous, and
mhm.
especially young people. There are very few young people who don't enjoy eating, so you have a lot of
Yeah.
opportunities to get people's attention and communicate something real and good and valuable. But I do think that we often think that culture is built through institutions. Culture and cuisine is something that happens professionally, and the domestic spaces are not just women in the kitchen, but everything that happens, that sort of meaning making and cultural um torch bearing that happens in domestic spaces is very undervalued. I just heard a talk this past weekend that was at the Dublin Gastronomy Conference, that was talking about trying to make that, talking about the kitchens, all the kitchens in Ukraine that were destroyed, and how, like, how much culture is destroyed every time that happens, and that these should be like kitchens, home kitchens should be protected under international law as as cultural centers or whatever, so that
Yeah,
it would be illegal to destroy them.
that's
But
a
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the
yeah,
idea that, I mean, that's literally what I thought of, when I think of, war, and particularly because Ukraine has all these, like canning kitchens, like it's
yeah,
preserving is a big part of the culture.
yeah.
So I remember when the war first started in Ukraine, I made a post that was, had a picture of one of these like canning kitchens, and just was thinking about how many of those would not survive the war. And anything that's already old like that, and that's connected to an old way that's like under serious threat, it's hard to see that, whether it's through natural disasters like um you know like Hurricane Katrina and all the
Mm,
I know a lot of people who worked on that project of all all the domestic food knowledge that was lost through through the hurricane and storm. Um and the same is true whether it's through war or through different like I'm saying, natural disaster type events, that it's hard to come back from that because
mm,
there's just so much history in those actual spaces.
yeah. You used the term radical homemaking.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Um, So, I a whole lot of things, but particularly these days, I think
Yeah.
I've thought about this. I need to write it because only by writing it will I figure out exactly what I mean, what the difference is. But
Yeah.
I've thought a lot about how my ideas, I came out of this counterculture, um, y- a lot of anarchist sort of food ideas. Um, in like Chapel Hill, anarchist ideas in general, and started my business Farmer's Daughter, like
Mm,
came out of that. And then recently to see all of this like Maha stuff that looks quite similar to the work that I've been doing, for the
mm,
last 26 years or so. Um and I'm forced to really try to articulate what it is that or how what I'm doing is not how what I'm arguing for is not the same thing as what
mm,
they're arguing for. Um, it's not easy to separate it all out. I think on some level, if I really want to give them the benefit of the doubt, is that they're responding to the mainstream, not recognizing some of the issues that they're having, right?
yeah.
I think they're latching onto the wrong things,
Mm,
but a lot of times we're responding to, there are points of agreement, I would feel like, they're
mm,
responding a lot of times to some of the same things that we're responding to. But I'm seeing, and what I grew up with, is I'm seeing, women are at the center of these systems. It's matriarchal.
mm,
The power structure and the knowledge, is very much about like strong women who are, the center of these families. And and they're not within these they're not defined by these very narrow ideas of femininity
mm.
and softness, and they're
Submissiveness.
they're sometimes they're stern,
Mm,
sometimes they are soft, but they're nuanced and dynamic
mm,
people. They are they're they and they do a lot of service for sure,
mm,
but, I still wouldn't say that they live to serve. They're dynamic people. They have a lot of different, uh, you know, um, motivations.
mm.
A lot of times, they're they're very stern and controlling, and are going to let everybody know what they think that they should be doing, and that's all great and fine too. But radical homemaking to me is really, starting with these ideas of, the sort of anti-capitalist ideas a lot
Mm,
of times for me. This idea that culture is something that is worth saving, is valuable, is indispensable, um, and not just being a sort of an ideal consumer and gobbling up every convenience that's offered to you. um, that is a slippery slope. Well, you will
mm,
wake up and find yourself, um, you'll find the hundreds, if not thousands of years of culture that have been passed on to you. You're going to be the one who drops the ball because, you, um, you just, you couldn't deal with all the pressures that are put on you, which I get, but I'm saying you have some choices, right? In terms of like, you can, uh, follow all this, advertising that's trying to sell you the newest, fanciest, shiniest thing that's going to make your life better. Or you can say like, well, maybe I don't need all those things, and maybe enjoyment and the good things in life are simpler than what, what these advertisements would have me to kind of believe in terms of what we're, supposed to aspire towards, right? But it's just, I don't know, it's all these little choices
Yeah.
um, that you get to make every day, and it requires sort of being intentional. And, but to me, and all the center of it is realizing that, it's about relationships, and it's about, culture, and trying to preserve that connection both with the past and with with the people that you're living with now, whether that's your
Right.
family or your community, and just being intentional about all of those, those relationships, and that includes, a lot of that can be practiced just through what you put on your table every day.
I think the system's rigged. I think we probably both agree the system is definitely rigged. It's hard for people, I think probably especially living in more central urban environments that don't have access to, a backyard where they can grow things.
Right.
Um, Access to good food is limited, especially when if you eat lunch at school, your
Right.
school programs are horrifying. The food that Americans and Canadian kids are eating is terrible. They don't know any better. But again, like you said, everyone has a choice that they can make where they can sit back and be like, "Oh, the system's rigged. This sucks. I'm just gonna go to McDonald's tonight." Or,
Right.
you know, um, you can try to make those small choices. But you talk a little bit about food sovereignty and food security as being different things.
Mhm.
Do you wanna talk about that? What the difference is between the 2?
Yeah, sure. So, sovereignty is about power, right? So,
Right.
sovereignty is like, do you have, are you sovereign in your food choices? Do you have the power to control the, even the options that you have? So, a lot of
Mm,
times, in order to be food sovereign, it really, it really, really helps that, you have your own land. Do you have access to land? Do you have that ability? You know, um, that was a big part of the civil rights era was, these farming co-ops where they were saying like, if we, like Fannie Lou Hamer said, like, if my cupboard's full of, I'm trying to remember what dishes that she said, like green beans and, like tomatoes or whatever. If my cupboard is full of, vegetable soup that I put up or whatever, like, I'm going to be a lot less vulnerable, right? Like,
mhm,
who can control me when I have all the food that I need for the year? And so
yeah,
that's sovereignty. This idea that, like, if you can take care of yourself, if you have enough power that people don't have that same level of control over you, right?
mm,
So food security, somebody else can decide, whether it's the state or, whatever government, or maybe it's your local food banks or whatever. They can make sure that you have enough food that you are not worried about where your next meal is coming from. That's food
mm,
security, right? If you're not nervous about your next meal, that can come from organizations. It just might You just might need those organizations to never fail for you to stay safe, right? So
yeah.
ideally, the power, to keep yourself, secure, food secure, and which is ultimately, a, your primary safety.
Mm.
If that power belongs to the individual, that's what we're always shooting for. The idea that you
Mm.
personally, that communities personally would have the power to, to self-determine, basically.
I think people really, have overestimated what their food security is too.
Oh,
I mean, there's
I mean, yes.
it's blows
Exactly.
my
You don't have to
mind.
be
No.
right. I mean, sure, a lot of people have a lot more flexibility in the market because they have more
Mm,
money, right? So let's
yeah.
say, I mean, as we've seen, food prices get really, ridiculous,
Mhm.
and that's going to narrow your choices. But what if? what if farming, what if California collapsed? What if farming
Yeah.
and, like, uh, in California collapsed, like, not, then rich people aren't even sovereign, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
yes, their money is going to cushion them and they'll be able to get whatever they need because they have the most buying power, probably, right? But
They
like,
can buy it.
but it all feels pretty fragile
Yeah.
coming out of the pandemic. We're just like, I don't know. Maybe we're not as secure as a country and with our like food system as
Yeah.
we thought we were. I mean, and certainly, if you really start studying agriculture and this, like, build up of the salts in the soil, the way that all these yields that were determined in labs are just not panning out,
Yeah.
whether it's, super bugs or super pests or super weeds, all of these things that just are
Yeah.
not cooperating the way that, lab ag said that it was going to work, right? So, we're all vulnerable. And I think one of the things that we really learned, like, through the pandemic is that, money can only protect you so far, so much, in terms of you still have to realize that we are all connected, and a system that is failing, your neighbors is ultimately failing all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if your government decides I don't know what it was like for you guys, but we literally couldn't leave the city area that we lived in. We couldn't travel, we couldn't move. Um,
Mm.
so you're limited geographically. You have to stay
Yep.
in the place that you are. And as well, there's certain people out there that are pushing lab grown meat and let's eat lots of crickets and not everybody wants to do that. And so
Right.
having that freedom to, you know, choose what you want to eat is I think a lot of people are starting to realize that it's limited and controlled by people outside of their small sphere too.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the average person has not really um grasp that level of vulnerability at all. Like,
No.
we're gonna look like some conspiracy theorists really quick if we
You
start
know
really.
you know what? I got a hard time from my friends before COVID, and then it hit, and then all of a sudden the phone calls and text messages roll in, and they're like, "Okay, if things start to get worse, we're gonna come to your house." I'm like, "Okay, I'm sorry. Like, where were you where I wanted to make sauerkraut 6 months ago? Yeah, I got a freezer full of meat, but that's because I've been working on, filling
Yeah.
it and."
Well, I always say, that, like, sort of the mutual aid, angle is
Mm,
that, stockpiling, I'm not, I have that tendency,
mm,
and I certainly understand it and it comes in handy. But, if I have a freezer full and a pantry full of stuff and nobody else in my neighborhood does, we're gonna eat that up really
yeah.
quickly. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I always tell people, like, what do you think you're gonna do? Like, shoot people when they're coming to your door? Like, are you that's not gonna help you. Like, the 5,000 people out your front door
Yeah,
who didn't make those preparations are gonna come knocking really quickly,
yeah,
right? Like, so, like, you have to have a community system, or you have to have an
yeah,
ability, right? That's something that's gonna buffer all of you, right? Like, it's about
100%.
relationships and skills and this ability that is affecting more than one person, because one family can't shield themselves
No.
against the collapse of everything out your front
No.
door.
No, and that's why I work really hard to try to, uh, help people and teach them not to be afraid of the outdoors and teach them not to be afraid to go foraging and make their own food, and I mean, my best friend, bless her heart, was raised in a house where, like, raw meat is just the scariest thing, and I got invited over to their place before Thanksgiving a few years back to cut up their turkey because they're gonna brine it, but they wanted to break it down first, and the fear in their eyes when I was cutting it and raw meat was being exposed to the cutting board, and the second I pulled it out and put it in the bin, her mother was in there with bleach spraying everything down, and I have to realize that not everyone grew up the same way I did, and not
Mm.
everyone has the same viewpoints I do, and I just gotta keep working to try to invite people into the fold to to learn and wanna be included, but yeah. I I when I work hard to try to help people and they rebuff my requests and then they come back and say, "Hey, I want your food." I'm like, so we're gonna have a conversation here."
Yeah. Yeah, that
Uh,
happens in my own family where my husband has a lot of anxiety about, especially chicken.
yeah.
"Was there raw meat here
Yeah.
ever?" I'm like,
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it's since been washed and sanitized." And I'm always like, "You know I teach serve
Yeah.
safe classes, right?" Like,
Yeah.
um, anyway, yeah, but, I mean, that I feel like that it's like you have to figure out a way, right, to have education that is empowering,
Mhm.
not education that is fear-based.
True.
That because the fear-based is really about stealing that it's saying you can't be trusted, right? You can't be trusted to cook your own chicken at home. You
Mhm.
have to buy that already cooked, or you have to buy that process in some way that's like more sanitary, safer, all these kinds of things, And like meanwhile, why is the chicken so toxic, right? It's, why is
Exactly.
there such high levels of salmonella on this chicken or whatever? Like,
Mhm.
no, we're not gonna look at that,
No.
I mean, I remember learning that we were I remember learning that the reason that E. coli became such like this huge ordeal, like in our childhoods or whatever,
Mhm.
was because it was the it was because E. coli wasn't new, but
Mm.
the idea that E. coli in a cow's stomach could survive in a human stomach had never happened before. Or I shouldn't say never because I don't know never, but that was not normal, right?
Mhm.
Because the digestive tract of a cow and the digestive tract of a human was so different. I think pH wise is the big difference that the bacteria couldn't survive in our digestive systems. But when we forced cows to eat corn,
Mm.
that made the pH of their digestive tract similar enough to a human digestive tract that now this deadly pathogen can survive in our digestive tract, and now we're vulnerable to that. But I was like, wait, what? Like this is because of corn, like corn feeding cattle. Like I'd never heard that. I'd never heard anybody say that ever. I mean, like in the whole, like all the dangers of raw milk, like they're all related to same thing. Like
Yeah.
grass fed milk is very different than corn fed. Anyway, so there's so much and like saying those kind of things out loud in the days
Mm.
in the days in this current political climate,
Yeah.
seems crazy. Like I'm very worried about, about these types of things these days. But I mean, they're not telling the truths about that kind of stuff either. But you know, there are problems with the current like systems of industrial agriculture, and whether that means changing them, like it's that all these things are very hidden, like we're not
Mhm.
talking about them. And I think just that knowledge to me was kind of mind-blowing because it just isn't common. Like I think even people who study food don't know those kinds of things. I only knew this because it came up in my pickle school where I had to
Ah.
take a class on acidified foods from NC State, North Carolina State University. And yeah, one of the like it's run by the food science department at NC State.
Mm.
And one of the guys was talking about E. coli because E. coli, can contaminate all these different vegetables. And there were all these
Yeah.
um, uh, cases of E. coli outbreaks that were being linked to, cabbage, lettuce, spinach, all those types of things.
Mm.
And so we were kind of talking about E. coli, and then that came up, and I mean, my mind was just blown. So yeah,
Yeah, I don't know how you solve it aside from just working to help people trust themselves. I mean, it's obvious that our politicians can't really be trusted. The food system can't really I mean, I like, we have a tin hat back here in the podcast studio. I don't know if I wanna put it on or not, but, like, our systems are broken, and I think you just need to learn how to trust yourself, and
Right.
then you can go from there. Because I just
Right.
you don't
Well, you
know
need
where to
right,
turn.
you need the skills. You need the
Yeah,
skills and the practice, right?
yeah,
You have to practice, and then you build trust, right? You
yeah,
build trust, trusting yourself. But, I do think, I always say, like, "Oh, it's not my" it's not I mean, I'm like, I'm not a policy person. It's not my
yeah.
job to solve the problems. I'm telling the policy people the problems. But I do think that if there's one thing that I have thought about, it's like, especially in the US, I mean, like, the terms for most politicians are, like, 2 years.
Mm,
And they don't ever have to be concerned about like long-term problems. So we are going to have some system outside of just these like 2-year elections of, um, you know, who are looking at long-term
mm,
bigger problems and change. So that is like one thing that I feel like seems really obvious. If we're talking about systems change,
mm.
no one's going to take that year. No one's going to take that kind of risk for like a 2-year term. You're going to have coalitions that are stretched beyond those kind of limitations if we want to have some kind of affect some kind of change in food politics. Which, because I'm saying this because I said earlier, like we have these choices, and I
Mm.
think personal choices in the food system are extremely limited. And I think those were failures actually of like sort of the Alice Waters and Michael Pollan kind of approach to, oh, buy with your pocketbook, da, da, da. Like
Yeah.
that, not, there are fail that didn't work for a lot of different reasons, but we do need a broader kind of coalition to achieve some of these bigger changes that we need to see in the food system.
I usually don't read quotes, but I'm gonna read this one because I really liked it.
Okay.
Okay, it says, "Certain foods are of such significance to my identity that I am bound and determined to pass on a love for them to my son. He will love field peas, he will love cornbread, he will love okra and chicken and dumplings and boiled peanuts, and he will love sweet potatoes. These foods are not just important to me, they are me." Now, I read that, I was like, "Oh my god, that I feel this in my bones." Like, I have 2 kids, and I want more than anything else for them to develop their own identity outside of me. Like, I want them to grow into their own people with their own stuff, but in regards to food, I don't feel that same way. Like, I need them to appreciate and love certain foods that I have grown up with and appreciate and love.
Mhm.
Like, do you how do you how are you trying to ensure that your son appreciates all these foods that are so important to you?
Yeah, I mean, to me, one of the most fun things that I've ever gotten to do
Mm,
is really kind of affect the palate of, my child. I
mm.
only had one. But I could have had a blast feeding a lot of them, but I only got to do it with one. But I do try to feed, my nieces and nephews and um other kids as well. I love working on food culture stuff. And how do you do it? I mean, I think the best way to do it is, it really has to be sort of like, you know, um, pleasure centered, connected to process, connected to stories and place. It's that whole thing about meaning making where, you know, when I, um, when I'm serving my son, boiled peanuts or whatever. I'm telling the story of how my dad used to have all of his friends over in the shed in the backyard, and cook these big vats of boiled peanuts, and then they would dump them over into this big cooler to cool off. And my sister and I would take the little shells of the peanuts and, after we ate the peanut out of it, literally scoop up just like dirty, briny water
Yeah,
and slurp it up. And I literally thought it was the best thing I'd ever tasted in my life.
yeah.
And it was basically dirt and salt water, like with these peanuts. But I mean, it was one of the, like the best food memories of my whole life.
Yeah,
But same with like I take my son to visit my family as much as possible where we have, there's still a lot of cooking outside. My brother's a hunter. My son, I send him off hunting with my brother, and then they're like, dressing the deer,
yeah,
cleaning fish, filleting fish, making sausage, just like for me, it's like having him just be part of that environment where there's a lot of just like good feelings around
Mm,
it. There's a lot of, whether it's that we're just all being together, it's sort of celebratory. And then, we're all kind of participating. So you understand those kind of relationships and that feeling of contribution that we were talking about earlier. So it's
yeah,
really it's not just about, do you like boiled peanuts? It's really, you got to give them that connection to somehow the process or the place or the people that these kind of foods come from. And then, it's also like, um, uh, just delivering it with, you want to have this like enthusiasm and joy, um, and just making those foods and those people really, be something that's really part of my son's, like our kids' like identity. They have to connect to it in some way. Um, and I don't feel like you're gonna just like get that like whether it's like in a restaurant or like buying boiled peanuts on the side of the road, like that's fun and that's fun to do and you should still do that.
yeah,
But really it's like, however it was that I connected to those things, anything that I can kind of give him that experience of, I'm really trying to do that. And then, as far as like when they're little kids and you're trying to get them to eat things, you just have to ignore what they like or don't like and just keep putting the same things out there and just pretend like, I don't know, like, what, okay,
yep.
just
Ignore the kids menu.
yeah, I always say, like, the worst thing that you can do for your
Yeah,
kid is give them exactly what they want every
yeah,
day, like, just ignore them.
yeah,
Just keep putting a lot of different things out there, and you yourself, like, they need to see other people enjoying it,
yeah,
but without pressure on them, my family, they never made us eat anything, and we all eat everything, but they weren't catering to us. We didn't have, endless supplies of snacks, and no one was afraid that we were ever gonna, starve when there was food around us. He was like, getting what you wanted just was not important to my parents, like, or even my grandparents. It's just like,
no.
they'll eat when they're hungry. They'll figure it out.
It's funny how that's become a thing. It's so strange to me that that's become like, ask your kids what they wanna have for dinner. It's like,
Oh my god, yes, the
like
pressure, and they say the psychological stress on like
I
a child to
know.
ask them what they want to eat is
Like, who wants to eat
so
what a
wrong.
five-year-old wants to eat? Like, I don't wanna eat what a five-year-old wants to eat. I
No.
mean, I think I'm lucky. My daughter always wanted, if she saw me eat it or my husband eat it, she wanted to eat with it. She always wanted to be at the adults table. We would take her to a restaurant and we had razor clams, so she wanted razor clams. We're like,
Oh yeah.
"Okay, well," our son was not the same. He was work. Like, he didn't like peas, so I taught him how to grow peas, and then now he
Mhm,
likes peas, right? Like,
mhm,
he needed that he needed that personal touch. Like, he didn't really eat meat.
mhm.
We took him hunting, and he harvested his first deer, and then all of a sudden, he's like, he gets it. But
Right.
I don't know. Kids are
I mean,
funny.
I'm still losing some of the battles, but they're not over, like I'm not my son, the one thing that he doesn't eat is he really does not like peas or beans of any type except for like he loves like tofu and stuff like that. So, but if I make a pot of beans, he'll literally eat it like it's so crazy. He'll eat like the rice and like all the other things, and then I just like put the gravy from the
Yeah.
beans. Like he likes the flavor, but he has some block to it or whatever.
Yeah.
And so for me, he's a very so some kids are very they sort of are adult focused, but my son
Mm,
is very peer focused. So I'm always if he has if he has friends whose families are good eaters, right?
mm,
I'm always like, Shh, go eat with them, like
yeah.
expose them. And like kids, especially by the time my son's 15 now, and he eats almost everything, but he still does weirdly like kind of like, no beans, like that's still like where he draws the line. I'm like, I'm made of peas
Yeah.
and corn foods, you know what I mean? Like, you will not survive not eating this. So, I'm always like,
Funny.
well, we gotta send him off to, like, Mexico, or we gotta send him somewhere where he won't survive,
Yeah, totally.
without eating beans
Yeah.
for long.
Well, is there anything else you wanna chat about? Anything, new coming up down the pipe for you?
Well, I mean, I do feel like my work these days is, front and center of that work is the work that I do at the People's Kitchen in
Mhm,
Philadelphia, and I do think it's kind of interesting. Sort of I think of my life as sort of like, Mississippi, like sort of in community, um, in this farming community, and then, you know, Carborough, Chapel Hill, sort of the market version of, like, farming community or whatever, and now being in Philly in this, like, city of it's really, where local food is very difficult,
Mhm.
we're pretty far away from farms, even though there's all these really amazing farms. Not that far away, but the communities just aren't interconnected in the way that they were when I was, living in Carborough and stuff. And it's just a lot harder for people, I feel like, to shop at farmers markets because they're harder to get to. The food's even more expensive.
Mm.
But there's all this like extreme waste that's just kind of it's everywhere, but it's concentrated in cities, and you have all these amazing organizations who are working on kind of trying to solve those problems. So a lot of the work that I'm doing these days is connecting with like-minded organizations who are doing a lot of food rescue work. And it's not like bad food, but it's food that's like in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Sure.
So can we get the food that's in surplus in one area shipped over to places like the People's Kitchen, where we can take the food that was not needed in one place and turn it into free meals. And we're doing that largely with uh, volunteer labor in the form of mutual aid. This idea that instead of having um, people divided between the givers and the takers,
Mm.
the sort of old model of Dickensian soup kitchen of like the food being pretty disgusting and the people who are eating it being pretty desperate. We're trying to make that a more kind of joy centered approach where you're actually building cultural community systems, and depending on where you are in your life at that moment, you may be able to be on both the giving or the taking side of that. You may stay in the giving, and you may never pick a side.
Yeah.
You may be contributing and also receiving simultaneously. So this idea of and I feel like that, to me, in a lot of ways, I'm getting inspiration for that from my this sort of collective community that I grew up in, of where ownership was tamped down by this responsibility that we had, like, to each other. And so kind of trying to can we bring those ideas, right,
Mhm.
to a city, to a dirty old city like Philadelphia,
Yeah.
Can we build community? And to me, I mean, the joy and the community that has been brought to me through all these other people that I've met, through all the organizations who are, like-minded and working on, um, you know, um, kind of trying to create these survival systems for people when, the institutions that they've relied on have largely failed them.
Yeah.
I've been, I mean, it's been a whole new chapter of my life that I've been really excited about, that I um, really didn't know much about at all going into it in 2020.
And, how has the reception been with the people that participate with you in the kitchen?
Amazing. Like,
Yeah.
I just got back from the Dublin Gastronomy Symposium, that the theme this year was food in crisis.
Mm.
And over the past couple of years, we've been trying to collect a lot of data the about the work that we do with People's Kitchen. And
Mm.
when we had a master's of public health student who was did all these surveys asking people, about how effective that the People's Kitchen has been sort of at like meeting their needs and things. Um, and one of the things that just kept happening over and over again was that people kept wanting to tell us about what working in the kitchen, what volunteering had done for
Uh,
them. And we were like, we don't really have a slot for that, or like, we don't, that's not a question any of these grant,
yeah.
uh, these people giving out the grant money, they're not asking us those questions. And then for me, just working in the kitchen over and over again, I would, I'm always just having different conversations with volunteers, and they're always telling us, oh, I really, I just felt so isolated. I had to get out of my house. I just got to stop doom scrolling.
Mm,
I just wanted to be able to do something real. And, hey, if I get to learn how to cook in the process, like that's just amazing.
mm,
And so, like, I just kept hearing all these, like, really inspiring stories about, how we're not just helping the people who don't know where their next meal is coming from.
mm.
We're helping this entire generation. Well, and it's not just a generation, because that's the other thing about the kitchen is that we get people from all different walks of life. It is definitely multi-generational, multi-class, everything. It's very diverse group of folks who come through the kitchen doors. Um, but we realize that we're helping people who increasingly feel depressed and isolated and extremely anxious.
Yeah,
And just self-esteem is low out there. People do not know how to do things. What we're talking about being divorced from your senses and estranged, that people need um non-judgmental environments that they can learn and practice those skills.
yeah,
They need guidance. It's not like they can just, that's the thing about like taste education and things like that. You can't really do it by yourself.
no,
You have to have somebody who already knows, right?
yeah,
Because it's cultural knowledge. It's being passed. And I'm saying cultural knowledge, but obviously we have a lot of different cultures that are at work. Our kitchen is located in the Passant Square um, neighborhood of Philly. It's like part of it's just south of the famous Italian market in Philly.
mm,
But that area is like really diverse, both class diversity and ethnic diversity. It has a lot of different immigrants. It has a lot of Asian immigrants. It has a lot of Latino immigrants. It has a lot of senior citizens. It has a lot of different types of people and many different languages. So there's all these barriers. But we just do our best to, because we're like, it's like this revolving door where, like, if there's like a group of people that we don't, that we're having a difficulty, communicating with or whatever, then we're saying like, we got to get these folks into the kitchen. We need to make relationships. We need to build, connection. And that's one of the things that we've done. Like, we have, a chef, Milo, who started out, um, who's now part of the kitchen, who started out receiving meals.
mm,
Same another Rebecca, who's like helps us like translate like Mandarin. Who, same thing. I call her. She's like a scavenger in the city. She knows where all the different, uh we have all these like community fridges. She knows like what time the things go in and all the different community fridges. She like rides the bus around checking things out. So she's, knows the lay of the land,
yeah,
and is like a regular volunteer in the kitchen as well. So it's just like this um nice kind of system where we really do believe that uh everybody has something to offer. Like,
yeah,
no matter like how long that I've been doing it, I don't have all the answers. Like, we need all these different people to contribute, who make who contribute both to our sort of knowledge base, to the culture, who can teach us more about like what's going on, what people need, what people are asking about, what the different challenges are, and can, we're always trying to like refine different systems. But more than anything, it's like we're building relationships and building community and security, in that way, like what we were talking about before.
yeah.
That's like your most important resource, is really your your relationships.
I mean, it sounds a heck of a lot like how you're describing your family before, you know?
Exactly.
It's like it's fully come full circle. It's amazing.
Totally.
It's such a massive problem. You don't hear about this much in other city, like, I'm sure they exist, but, this is like it sounds amazing. It sounds, like, incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I mean, I do think, I mean, I don't think many people are doing what we're doing. We're
Mm,
coming out of I mean, that also has to do with sort of my background, like, when I was living in Chapel Hill, I was, like, part of Food Not Bombs, which is, like, an anarchist, vegan free meals, uh decentralized group that's been around, it was a response to the nuclear war movement, like, in the '80s.
mm,
So it's been around for a very long time, but just pops up in cities all over the country. But that kind of it was the groundwork where, it's really, we operate we have some paid staff, and we are a 501(c), but we still very largely operate on this egalitarian, horizontal, mostly like operate through a Discord server,
mhm.
and like and volunteers, um, and just like this crazy little ragtag group of people who
Yeah,
just, like, kind of miraculously, through just, like, communicating, like, values-based, culture and this, like, alternative to what I call, the sort of "we don't care if you're dying in the streets" version of capitalism that we're, like, living through. And I think that being in a city like Philadelphia is that you see that alternative, right? You see that. You see how bad things can get. And, you don't really have to talk about the shortfalls of capitalism with people who see them.
yeah.
We're not having to convert anybody to, you know, uh, that's a nice
Yeah.
thing about being, in a city with plenty of problems like Philadelphia.
Yeah, I mean, I live in Vancouver, so I think it's
Yeah,
we have a very similar thing. It's just it's so interesting seeing where you flip the dynamic. There's not a coming in and looking down your nose, "We have to save these people." It's everyone has something to offer, and
exactly.
when you describe your family, everyone has a role, everyone has a responsibility, and there's confidence that comes from that that you don't get
Right.
by being on the receiving end,
Right,
right?
and just like in a family, you don't have to love every single thing about every single
No.
person in order to work with them either. I feel like that's also part of kind of getting over yourself, you know? Whether it's like in your family model or in your community model, it's like, you know, um, there's tolerance and, that's part of it too. Which I think is really important because it's really easy to get wrapped up in all kinds of ideals when you're talking about this kind of work.
Yeah, I bet. It sounds like you guys are doing amazing work. I think it's fantastic.
Great.
I've really, really enjoyed our conversation today.
Awesome.
I'm gonna put some links, for people to check out your book and the rest of the books in the series too, because it's amazing, as well as where you're working in Philly and, your Substack. Any other things that you'd like to see people look at, check out for you?
That all sounds great.
Yeah?
I'm at Preserving the South on Instagram. That's probably where I post the most,
Yeah.
and Preserving the South on Substack. And then the last, and yeah, People's Kitchen Philly. I post there as well on Instagram.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate talking to you.